Hello. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I have the chat set up. Hello, everybody. I have the chat set up, and I just want to make sure you have access to the chat. Take some time to locate it. If you don't have access to the chat, go ahead and use the phone to let me know. Okay, today we're going to do something a little different. Normally do faces, figures, but part of this channel isn't going to be just about faces and figures. That's the ultimate for me. The ultimate for others are going to be very different. So there's a lot of aspects that goes into artwork, and a lot of those aspects are going to be smaller things, components, accessories, landscape, backgrounds. There's just a lot that kind of goes into an actual drawing, and what I do and try to really convey and make a basically use to convey a message, a feeling, an atmosphere. And just like what you saw in here earlier, with something like this, it might seem like, okay, yeah, it's just one thing, but there's actually a lot of components that go into something like this. It's the hair, obviously. It's the background, where the background stops from the paper, where it starts, how dark the background is, all the texture within the background. Now, when we deal with things such as charcoal, yes, you can put a lot of texture in it, but when you'll start seeing some of my color pencil work, there's a lot of aspects that go, and every stroke pretty much has a thought behind it. It's not just okay, yeah, let's just fill this in. There's actually different ways I fill things in, and it's really powerful for artists to know that as far as the backgrounds are concerned. So even things such as, let's see here, such as this right here, which is completely a seascape. And actually, I'm really glad I put that up there, because I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this down a couple notches to be more realistic. Go up one notch on lightness. There's a lot that goes into it, and you don't just kind of like blindly put things in on here on the background. Every stroke kind of has a little bit of intention to it, if not a lot of intention. Oftentimes just as much. There are times it might actually have more intention than the than just, I mean, as much intention as the foreground and where all your details are. I remember when painting this right here had a lot of intention going to kind of show that there's a depth here. Not depth just in the sense of color, but depth in the sense of the water there did have a little more depth to it. There's nothing in the sky that was reflecting this. That was the color of the water and how it reflected the sky. So it wasn't something in the sky reflecting that color. That was to show that it's deeper. Same thing with this darkness. Same thing with all of there. It kind of does two things. It shows that there's depth there, plus the darker, making it darker there means that you're actually going to pop some of the highlights right there. So there's a lot of different things that goes into faces, figures, landscapes, backgrounds, all of that. Another one that I kind of want to show really quick. Let's see how this one shows up on the camera. is this one. And all these different leaves here actually do make a large difference. Everything in the background here, and this is watercolor by the way, but everything in the background, all of this texture that was in there, yes, it kind of did its own little thing, but I threw salt right along in here, threw some salt around to get some of this texture in there, specifically at this section, because if you go ahead and you draw a line across, this blue actually helps bring in makes your eye come into the eyes, which are also blue. So, and it's all just kind of like a balance and trying to get everything into the focal point, but not just literal arrows or simple things, but in a way that's complex, that balances everything out so that you can always look all around the picture, but everywhere you look, you still have a pull to the focal point, which are the eyes. That starts to become very important with figures and where you want to, and larger pieces where you want to have this really large piece. You want to show a lot of different things, but you never really want the focal point and your subject matter to be second guessed, and you always want everything going back to that. So it kind of allows the eye, the mind to explore, but the fact that you have that subject matter so well defined, and there's such a pull to that subject matter that it always kind of like it's what you use to write a story. So that's how it is with a lot of, when you start looking at a lot of different Sistine Chapel and a lot of Renaissance art, where there's a lot of different multiple aspects and subjects and cherubs and, you know, but you still always have the main focus, and everything is there to draw to that focus, to the subject, even though there's an entire story around it. The Last Judgment is really a cool one by Michelangelo. There's just a lot of different, The Last Judgment has a lot of different aspects and a lot of little, what they call Easter eggs, where you can just look at it for days and find all these little nuances everywhere. Same thing with The Gates of Hell by Rodin, even though it's a bronze door. With everyone coming, you know, you have all these figures that are being kind of like trying to escape from hell and escape death. There's just, you always kind of have all these different subjects, but they all are in harmony, and you always seem to have one or two subject matters that are the focal points. So with that, those little nuances, those little accents actually become a really big part of the overall picture. So I thought I'd do, and at the request of somebody else, I know that I've been doing a lot of faces and stuff, but I thought maybe, and I knew I was going to do this down the road, but I thought maybe now would be a good time to try to start working on some simpler aspects. And practicing charcoal, it took me a long time. I picked up a color pencil, and I was able to get realism with color pencil long before I was able to get realism with charcoal. Color pencil is so controlled. I mean, it's like driving a Maserati. I mean, you just have so much control over a color pencil. Watercolor, it's almost the exact opposite. Charcoal is more along the lines of watercolor. It kind of just gets everywhere. The dust goes where it wants to go, especially, that's why I have things vertical, so that the dust kind of will fall rather than staying on the picture and going everywhere it wants to go and doing whatever it wants to do. Watercolor, control is just basically, you never really control it. You can only approximate what and how the water, pigment, and paper are all going to react, and the brush. So I thought we could go ahead and kind of like take a middle ground with charcoal, keep charcoal as kind of like something that I've been already dealing with and discussing. So basically, there's one subject matter that has enough complexity for good shading, but is simple enough for good shading, can be used everywhere and anywhere that oceans are used and water is used, and maybe even where water isn't used. Um, and it's one of my favorite subject matters to draw and to use for exercise. And that is the humble little seashell, which I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? There's the whole thing of, well, you always see spheres and rectangles and A's and trying to figure out, how to make things work. And we are going to start with that, but we're going to go and we're going to transition from something like that into something a little bit more complex, more organic. So I would go ahead and take your finest charcoal that you have. I am using a very small, a very thin square charcoal. It's Nitram charcoal. It's my favorite thus far. It's somewhere in between vine charcoal or willow charcoal and compressed charcoal. It's very easily erased, but it's very controlled in the sense of how it reacts on paper. So I just have a basic piece of paper, and I think right now we're going to do something we're just going to practice light. So let me see what I have here. We're going to go ahead and use this red box. And it's glossy, so it's fun. And everyone's you've probably already dealt with this. If you have a red box, you can see that you have, and actually I'm going to kill this light because single light source is actually the best for shadows in photography too. Fashion photography and other product photography and may argue with me, and that's fine, but right now we're dealing with art. So you can see there's a light, there's a dark. If I were to go ahead, and you can see how now it's reflecting the light because I have the second light on. So you can see two shadows versus one shadow, and you're going to see that shadow in my arm, in my wrist. So you can see that shadows are going all over the place. They really don't make sense because honestly the world is really meant for the sunlight, which gives you that one light source. So I'm going to go ahead and kill this. And you can see how the light's reflecting on here and you're missing light over here. So this is going to be lighter, this is going to be darker because we're not doing color. And red is actually zone 7 gray, meaning that it's a darker gray. So actually this would be a darker gray than if it were yellow or even white. So you can see the value of the white versus the value of the red. And a way to kind of do that is to squint, and you can actually see, and just blur your vision, squint, and you'll see how this starts to come up darker because you stop seeing color, you start seeing just value. So if we were to do a box with the light source, we're going to say the light source is coming this way, as we normally do. And we have a box. light is going to be half shade on here, or actually if the light's coming here, let me do it this way. This is going to probably make it a lot easier. So the light's actually coming from right about here. So this is reflecting all the light. So there's not going to be a whole lot of shading here. Here, it's not going to receive as much light. And the further back it goes, the less light it's going to receive. Light starts to dissipate after with distance. So the more distance there is from the light source, the darker things get. And that's probably an obvious for me to say, sorry. And then this one, because the light's coming this way and it's shining down a little bit on the top, there's going to be a little bit more light on the top, but maybe not as much. And then depending on whether this sits on the ground, coming this way, you're going to have a little bit of a now I'm having to draw shadows, which has been a long time. You're going to have a little bit of a shadow. And if it's going this way, the shadow is actually going to probably be closer to and it's going to follow this contour. So now, so this doesn't blend into the shadows. What we can do is we can actually kill just a little bit of that, or just a little bit of that. So basically, light would go this way, that would be brought over here, this would be brought over here, this would be brought over here. So, you know, depending on how you want to do your shadows, if the light source is this way, then the shadow is going to come over here. And the best way to do that is just basically, you know, well, why don't we just do it? If we have your light source this way, you can see the shadow doesn't necessarily always, you can see how it kind of goes in a different direction right there, and it is larger. So we could actually, this is where reference is fun. And that's if it was up against, but because it's laying down on something, you can see how the shadow on the paper is really large because, you know, you basically draw the lines all the way to the flat surface. I don't really get into too much of that unless I actually have, you know, something where it's on a flat surface standing up and I really want to go into there. But if we go ahead and we were to do this as such as egg, a few fun things happen with an egg because it's spherical. These are going to be your dark shadows. You're going to just keep, because your highlight is going to be around here. And underneath, because it's cylindrical, you know, oblong and cylindrical, there's going to be a little bit of shadow here, because remember, your highlight is going to be the furthest out. So the darkness makes things recede. And then I'm just going to take this. I'm just going to keep smearing. Smooth everything out. And I just realized that, haha. And then the shadow is going to be kind of like, and then this is really interesting because right around here, especially with curved objects, this is all nice and dark from the shadow. But you're actually going to have a little bit of light that does get reflected right there, just ever so slightly. And again, it's so much easier with color pencil. And that actually starts to become really important with things like noses, underlips, breasts, some of your, you know, depending on where the arm is, like against, that little reflected light really does help with, you know, how things are projected. And then right here, you're going to have is where your highlight's going to be. And that's where we can go ahead and, because this isn't exactly the whitest of white, you can just add the white, but that would be much better on tone paper. So again, you know, you want to kind of make all of these, the further it is from the light source, and the further it is from the light source, the darker it will be. And I like to smooth out some of these edges. Because basically the less light that it receives. And so if something is, it's basically in shadow, if something is covering or blocking the light. So seashells are awesome. Because you can have very organic shapes with them. And they're just fun to practice. Actually, this should probably come over a little bit more. Just looking at it in the camera. So this gets rounded a little bit. It's basically like a cone. And this is the top of a cone. So you basically have a cone, and a cone. This goes on top of this. And then you have an arm that stretches out and then attaches, and it is on a curve. So it's almost kind of like a glass. So with the seashell, you know automatically the place that isn't going to receive any light is going to be the deepest part, which is on the inside. It's going to be right here. This isn't going to receive much light at all because it goes into internal words, internal darkness, you might say. And then if the light's coming this way, it's also blocking the arm, and what's in here, the arm is blocking things. But this right there, because from the top view, this is the top view of the shell. So the light, this is going to catch some of that light coming in. It's going to be reflected off of that and catch it. So it's just going to be dark here, but it's not going to catch that much. And I'm just going to go ahead and smear that to soften it. Now, this is going to be in shadow as well, but there's still going to be more light than in here, because this is how the shell kind of works on the inside. And I use some of these lines here to start showing the kind of the contour, the shape of the shell. And then I'll shape this, and I'll start drawing lines out this way, kind of like in the same, drawing the same shape. And then finally, trying to remember. So it's been so long. Some wrap. Yeah, I believe it's going to be like this. It's dark right there, not because of shadowing, but because that's how the cone shell works. So it kind of actually, and oftentimes with shells, I don't even deal with the shadows unless it's on a person or something. And then I'm just going to go ahead, and because it's charcoal and so easy, I'm going to follow the contour. And just drag that. Then I'm going to drag this part here because this is going away from the light source on the bottom part. And then I'm leaving the highlight there, but I'm just going to go ahead and put some highlights in. And just soften all this up. And then the same thing with up here. I'm going to soften this up. And then I'm going to just put an edge right there. And that is a virgin cone shell. Cone shells are quite lethal, by the way. You see one live, don't pick it up. They'll harpoon you, literally. So are there any questions on what's going on right now? I just realized you probably can't see this. And I'm actually going to do a little something here. And I'm also going to a little too much, even more so. Olive shells are another fun one. They're all around California, especially Monterey. They're small. I think the largest I've found one is like the size of a grape. And again, all you really want to, and it's another simple shell, and all you're really trying to do is get lights and darks to make it look three-dimensional, cylindrical, like it has some shape, some form. And olive shells are harmless, by the way. You'll see a lot of hermit crabs actually get into the olive shells. I don't know if I've ever seen a hermit crab go after a cone shell, though. So I'm kind of getting it a nice tone of gray, and then I'm coming back. I'm adding more material here to make it a little bit darker. And same thing on this side. And I'm taking the eraser and I am just giving the ever slightest detail here to actually kind of lighten this, just to kind of bring it to the front to make it pop forward. Just drawing some lines, kind of show contour and shape. And then you can always soften it up to give it a little bit of texture there. I'm not even sure you can actually see that. And it's not quite, they're actually quite smooth up here. Trying not to block the camera, I really am. And doing some highlights there to kind of, even though it normally gets darker there, the light's coming this way and it's still going to reflect a good amount of light. And the reason why I'm doing seashells right now, rather than what a lot of people do, I actually wish more people would do seashells for practice versus and that just kind of shows a little bit of a crease, which oftentimes you'll see in seashells when you look really close. And again, this seashell is going to be like it's going to be like the size of, a lot of them are like the size of my finger. So, you know, this is an enlarged version of it. Cone shells, this is a decent sized one, but I mean, they can get pretty big. But seashells, they're hard. They're very organic in shape. And there's not a whole lot of, like flowers, there's a lot of layering. Even with leaves, um, with leaves and things, there's a lot of layering, and it's the shapes change a lot. Not so much with seashells. They're pretty hard, and they stay the same shape. So it's really easy to light them from different ways, and you don't have to worry about them. You know, if you ever want to do still life, you don't have to worry about them drying up, dying. Flowers, there's so many different petals and layering, and each petal is going to react to the light differently. Seashells, there's so, like I said, there's so much you can do with them. I used to do conch shells just over a cup of coffee. I'd be ballpoint pen, which is really good to do with them. Ballpoint pen on on a napkin, and there's, the forms are just so complex, and yet really, really feminine. There's so much you can do with them. But as far as gaining shapes, form, shadows, I mean, this right here is pretty much like an eye. This you can turn into a nose so easily. Um, you know, fingers. There's so many shapes that are cylindrical that once you really master some of these complex shapes from seashells, you can go just draw just about anything organic. Um, and they're very fascinating to study, and to start learning more about them as well. They're just, I love the ocean, and they're just a way to study. I mean, they're just a way to learn about the ocean, and something that most people don't realize, and something that's completely separate from the world you're used to living in, because you're talking about living into something that is automatically within 5 feet, your red is just about gone. Well, actually, around 12 feet, your red is just about gone. And once you hit around 20 or 30 feet, you're getting into, your yellows are gone, and your blues are predominant along with your violets. So a lot of these fish that are bright red, you actually see them in real, you see photos of them when without the flash, and they're black. They're just black because no red is reaching down there. They're just, so I should actually say dark gray. There's just no red reaching down there. A lot of your corals, it's cold, and all your food is just basically moving, moving along right by you to eat. And when you're a coral, and you might not have any light, or you might be in the upper regions and the surf zones, and you might be getting more light than any plant would receive. Um, well, I shouldn't say plant because the trees get up there pretty high, but I mean you're you're just having all of this light, and then you've got color, and and you're basically in an environment, a habitat that's your air, which is your water, is 800 times denser than what air is. So it's just everything is just so different. It's a whole different world. So it is something fascinating that way as well. Um, I should probably do one of my favorite shells, and I use it a lot. These are two very simple shells that you can easily make necklaces from. And when I say that, I'm actually talking, you can, drawing wise too. You can draw necklaces from them. You can do bracelets. You can have them in the hair. They're small. They're easy to accent with. One of my favorite shells, and I have one, and I want to get a better specimen of one. And by the way, I wouldn't go out and buy like Murex shells and a lot of the shells that are like $5 and stuff, because oftentimes they just they're killed in order to be obtained. And to get one or two is one thing, but to get this huge collection, you're much better off, especially if you live by the beach, going and collecting one that's already dead, rather than a lot of the ones where they go in deep in the water and they just dredge them out and then dry them. Same thing with starfish, and then dry them up and then sell them as souvenirs. It's just not the best use. But let's see if I can pull this off. And as you notice, I haven't been doing a lot of charcoal shading the way like I do faces, and because I'm kind of trying to show a little bit of how it's a lot more line drawing, and trying to show shapes and things and how to build up on something rather than just like right here, I'm trying to show you, okay, it's going to be this shape and it's easier to build using lines, and then I'm just kind of like enhancing the charcoal with smearing it, versus what I would normally do with charcoal is more paint with it and put it down and then do highlight, pull away your highlights and keep adding shadows, which is the exact opposite of color pencil or watercolor, where you build your shadows. And where you just keep pushing back with your shadows and leaving your highlights alone. And then oil paint, you basically oil paint and acrylic, you're basically putting depth in your shadows and building up more of your highlights. It's funny, you can actually build up your highlights with those mediums. But I'm going to go ahead and do this one. I've only been doing it for about 40 years. Actually, I'm going to do it this way first. So it's kind of like an auger shell. Never done this in charcoal. And each chamber just keeps getting smaller and smaller. This kind of goes up like this. Goes like Okay, so now that we're done with nails on the chalkboard from charcoal, it's just, this is the opening to the cavity here. And then this is shadowed here because the whole thing is round. So I want to leave my highlight there. I'm just going to go ahead and this is a brown seashell. It is a beige, like a milky mocha colored seashell. So it's going to have a little bit of color in the whole thing except for the highlight. And then it's just, you come down here and you do exactly what the shell does. Repeat, just smaller. And then down here, probably not even going to have to use any. I'm going to go ahead and build up. Okay, and then I just kind of pushed charcoal up. And then I'm going to go over and color this in. And this is white, this is brown, and this is white. And it's a lot more intricate. And then I'm going to come over and I'm going to do a highlight right here. And on this one, this one. And I realize you guys are going off screen there. I'm going to go ahead and try to make this even more round by creating more contrast. So if I've got the light coming this way, this is going to be blocking light. This is going to be blocking light. Essentially, it's kind of like an egg. It's going to be blocking light in the opening where it's going to be the darkest. Same thing goes here. Then I'm going to cut this down a little bit. I'm doing a nice long stroke to shave it down. I'm not doing perfectly straight because though it's pretty straight, it is still curved. And they're very fragile. These tips can actually almost come to a pretty fine needle point. And then in between each section, there's a little bit of a ring, and that ring is white. So kind of trying to show that a little bit here with just little touches of the eraser, and I'm not necessarily drawing it, I'm just insinuating it. Kind of hope that kind of picks up on the camera there. These are more round, so I'm going to and in doing that, I can probably even do one more section. Maybe not. I choose to keep it. And these are really cool, like hanging off of a necklace. Life size is about, this is almost just about true. This is probably one larger version of life size. They're a little bit more graceful, but it's almost, true to life as far as length. Definitely, it might just be a little bit slimmer. So you can see how it can be a really cool necklace, especially a smaller one of them. And then so I hope this has kind of shown a little bit more about just shading and focusing on shading and having a little bit more fun with each accent, what could be used as an accent piece. I mean, honestly, you could even use them for background. I mean, you could easily have something like this slanted on a rock with a butterfly perched off of this, and then you've got some surf and turf. I mean, there's just like a lot of different things you can do with seashells. The conch shells, which are the extremely large shells, like I said, they are fun. Part of me wants to draw one up, but I'm going to ask you if you guys think you have enough time for a conch shell, and I can draw that up really quick. If not, you can go ahead and call it a night. Any questions you have, just go ahead and throw it in the chat. I'm going to wait a couple minutes and go through my materials and see if I have what it takes to do the conch shell, if you decide to do that. So I'm going to wait a little bit. I know there's a little bit of a lag with the system. Streaming in general, actually. All right, cool. I'm totally understand. I'm probably there too, and calling it a night. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you next week. All right, thanks, and I will talk to you guys later. See you all later. Have a good night.